What is going on, people? We are back to our regularly scheduled podcasting time. The MCU is back, so therefore we are back in the current content phase of the year after the long winter break. I am, of course, Dom the Movie Nerd, and I am joined by longtime friend of the channel, our friend from up north, Brandon, aka the Brando Critic. Happy to have you back on, dude. You ready to talk some quantum madness?
Yeah, absolutely. Count me in.
Oh man, it's certainly been an interesting road here. All of that and more on today's episode of the Talkin TV podcast. What is going on, everybody? Happy Monday morning. Hope that all of you guys who are fortunate enough to have a day off today are enjoying it very much. I am, like I said, Dom the Movie Nerd, the host of the Talkin TV podcast, and I'm joined once again by my good friend Brandon, aka the Brando Critic. We are here to talk about quite possibly a movie that seemed already doomed out the gates, almost like some people were just waiting with bated breath to launch their bad reviews. Luke, of course, is in the comments section with us this morning. Luke, glad to have you as always. So, Brandon, first off, how have you been, man? It's been a minute. Just wanted to talk about just your life in general and what you've been up to on your side of the world.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys hear right now, I'm a little bit under the weather. This month I just can't catch a break. So like I'm battling, that virus, and then now I'm sick again. But in terms of my personal life, just got a cat. So that is my first personal pet. I've had family dogs all the way through my childhood, but this is my very first cat. He's around and he's running around right now. He's got the zoomies. So maybe if he comes in, I can show him up to the camera. But when he's in the zoomy mode, just let him get his energy out. But I mean, January was a pretty slow month for movies, as it always is. So trying to get back into watching movies that I hadn't seen in a long time or haven't seen at all. So watching movies like Heat again, or Adventures in Babysitting, which I'd never seen before. So basically, if I'm not watching a movie in the theater, I'm trying to watch a movie that I've never seen before, just to expand my horizons and watch more films, and then trying to get into more YouTube shorts. So if we're talking about my YouTube journey, getting into more YouTube shorts, also getting into the movies that people had sent me in the mail. I'm really behind on those. And what I've always told my subscribers is if you send me something in the mail, I will do a video on it. And it's been piling up, and I just reviewed The Bear from 1988. And I hadn't seen that one before, so I just reviewed that as well. And now it's starting to pick up. So of course we have Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is probably like the first big tentpole blockbuster of the year. Maybe I think Creed 3 is next.
We got Cocaine Bear next weekend, and then it's Creed 3 the week after.
Gotcha. So I'd say, yeah, then Cocaine Bear comes up next week. And then, so yeah, then it starts to get into the bigger blockbusters, and hopefully we get some more movies like Avatar: The Way of Water, or movies like Babylon, or movies like Top Gun Maverick, just movies that are mesmerizing and movies that really remind us why we love movies. I know people were kind of split on Babylon, but those ones are movies that were up there for me. So I can only hope that 2023 brings another big batch of really great movies. But of course, like you said, people were already ready to destroy this movie in the comment section on different reviews on Twitter. It's getting to the point now where, at least in terms of my YouTube journey, it's kind of a post and ghost syndrome. I don't get into conversations on Twitter or Instagram anymore because, like you said, everyone is mad, upset about everything. And it's not fun to discuss movies anymore in that certain zeitgeist.
Right.
So now it's the only thing, and I keep telling people, the only thing that you can control is the movies that you see personally and what your opinion is about them. That's the only thing that you can control. So with my videos, I go in there with an open mind. I give people my honest opinion. People will either agree with me or they'll disagree with me and still say like, well, I can see your point. Or they'll just be like, well, you're just a hater. You were paid off to, say this or whatever. It's just the way of the game. So did you want to talk about that first? Was kind of
Yeah,
the
well,
initial
it's funny
backlash
that
to
you
it?
mentioned that because the only response that I have to those immediate comments is just, "Hey, welcome to reality," because this is unfortunately the truth of the reality is that just it's ironic the idea that like the whole internet movement back in the Wild West days in the late 2000s of the internet started with like anonymous chat boards and like everyone was in like their own strangely like individualized. I don't even know how to describe it because I wasn't on there, but like their own individualized chat rooms back then. Like this is even like
Yeah.
predating Facebook, just talking about like early on Reddit threads and stuff like that. And now it's like the internet has become like this Wild West virtual subspace that now you can't even go to just have a good time. And you have to like almost like reform these micro organized groups because you're 100% right. Like I fortunately enough do not have to deal with this problem just because of like how I treat my interaction with the social space. But yeah, it's tough just trying to like get in touch with people and like really bond over this stuff anymore, which is kind of so alienating because that's part of the thing that makes watching movies so enjoyable. But yeah, as far as this movie goes, it's like, I mean, the initial problem that I have with the reviews is that they're covering a lot of stuff that we kind of already knew about. You know, we knew that the MCU is in trouble. We knew about the rapidly declining quality. We knew about the vast increase in their focus on putting out more product, as opposed to just a certain amount of product per year, which is a strategy that they are already backtracking on now that Disney's under their I should say they're not so much new, but new old leadership strategy,
Yeah.
with Bob Iger taking the seat back. So you have all of those factors to go into it. And you also clearly have a movie that was very, very obviously changed in a last minute reshoots. You know, we all know about the infamous reshoots that Marvel's smart enough to not publicize about the way that DC always was. A strategy I never understood. But so now you have this movie, right, which is in a strange way, like the post 2021 season of Marvel has been like in a weird way. Like I think what's been making that the most disappointing is that we're now getting all of these long-awaited sequels to movies that we got like right before Infinity War and Endgame. You know, like we just got Multiverse of Madness about a year ago. You know, which was a sequel to a movie that came out 6 years before it. There was a 6-year gap between the first Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness. You know,
Right.
then you have same thing. You have a 4-year wait between Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. You know, by the time that the Marvels comes out, you're gonna have a 4-year wait between that and the first Captain Marvel. So you have all of these long, and then obviously if you want to throw Love and Thunder into that as well, you know, there was 5 years between that and Ragnarok, which it was very clearly attempting to emulate. Oh, Luke, that does make me very happy. I think you're going to enjoy that very much. But my point being is that because the movies that we got in 2021 with Marvel were primarily originals, you know, Black Widow, Shang-Chi, Eternals, you know, 2 of them being originals, 1 of them being a spin-off for a character that had never had her own solo effort before, and then No Way Home being the phenomenon that it was. It's like we've kind of been in this weird, like, disappointing sequels phase for Marvel because we're getting all these long-awaited sequels to all of these movies that we've been waiting on, you know, because in the early days of Marvel, the only movies that had gotten sequels were the movies that had trilogies, you know, the big 3, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and then you had the immediate sequels to a few of their movies that had been around early enough, like like Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man. And
Ooh, all right.
now you have the conclusion of this trilogy. And this also kind of ties into a point that I want to bring up later on about Ant-Man and how it's strange evolution throughout the course of the entire MCU. Now that we're in multiverse, right? Now that we're technically in phase 5, we're in phase 5 of what's it called? Phase 5 of Marvel storytelling now, which is insane considering the fact that it still feels like we just got Marvel back, at least in my mind. And so you have now positioned Ant-Man as one of the most important figures in the MCU in general. And so I don't know. I feel like critics in general have always had this weird relationship with the Ant-Man subspace of the MCU, where they're like the goofy, light, fun comedies. Like people like them because of how not important they are. And I'm just wondering if like the shift to all of a sudden now this arguably being one of the most important MCU movies, at least as far as understanding the story going forward. I'm wondering if you think that has anything to do with that.
Well, I agree with you that people, just general audiences, are kind of tired of the quantity versus quality route that they're taking. Because even with me, it's like you expect me to watch every single Disney Plus show, watch every single movie in order to get the basic information necessary to understand these stories. And I think as soon as you start doing that, you are in for a recipe of disaster. Because even back in the day when you had movie sequels, for the most part, of course, you are going to understand the story more if you watch the films that come previously. But the movie also is contained enough to understand like just basic storytelling. Who is their main character? What are their wants, their needs, their motivation? Who is the villain, or what's the villain? Like, what's the ultimate purpose of the movie? The structure. So, what's the setting? What's the tone? Like, whatever these things may be. Whereas that vital information, oh, it's not in this movie that you're watching. It's in this Disney Plus show. So make sure that you buy the subscription so you understand. And I think that that is going to be a recipe for disaster, because even somebody like me who, back in phase 1, 2, and 3, it was like opening night. Oh my God, I can't wait. Captain America, Winter Soldier's coming out. Oh my God, I'm so on board. Like back then I was completely on board with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Again, it was still pretty fresh. It was still pretty new. We hadn't really seen that before, of just all these intertwining stories. But that's where I might not agree with the fact that, you're saying like, okay, well, Multiverse of Madness is a 6-year sequel to, the first Doctor Strange. So I guess technically you're correct, but I think that once you start to compartmentalize, where it's like, well, now you have the Ant-Man trilogy, and then you have the Doctor Strange, 2 movies, or then you have the Thor 4 movies, right? So I guess you could technically watch Thor 1, Dark World, Ragnarok, Love and Thunder, but you have so much story in between then that is vital to the main storyline. So it's like there's no such thing as the trilogy anymore. There's no such thing as like just I'm going to only watch the Iron Man movies. I'm going to watch the Captain America movies. You have to watch from Iron Man 1, or if you want to be, the purist, start with First Avenger, then Captain Marvel, and then go on that way.
I hate that, by the way. I hate that
Yeah.
like people invented like, oh, the chronological way in
Yeah.
which to watch the MCU, because the truth is it really only affects like 3 movies placement, because the MCU for the most part plays out in real time. So I don't know. I always
Yeah.
hate when people do that.
So
But
it's like you have all of this information that is necessary for the story and all of these different things. So in terms of people going, well, Ant-Man is supposed to be the funny one. Sure, Ant-Man was definitely more of a funnier character, but now, like you said, they're using this in the overarching storyline. It's going, well, okay, how do we introduce Kang? We need to introduce the quantum realm. We need to introduce a bunch of different timelines and different variants. Okay, well, let's introduce that in Loki, the show on Disney Plus, and then let's introduce that in Ant-Man Quantumania, because in Marvel's eyes, for you to understand the story, you have to watch everything. And last year was finally the year where I'm going, you know what? I can't keep up. Or 2021 was the year that I'm like, I can't keep up anymore. You had WandaVision. It's the first big Marvel show. Then you have Black Widow, and then you have all these different movies. And then, of course, you get to like, Moon Knight was the first one where I'm like, I can't finish it. Or just, I had no problem with it, but it's just too much. And then you have Miss Marvel. Then you have She-Hulk. And there's so much content out there where it's like, it's so much to consume that you're losing just the general audience. So now when you have a general audience member going, oh, Ant-Man and the Wasp, I guess I'll check that out. I think that they're like funny movies. No, it's the big Marvel plan. It's not just the one Ant-Man movie anymore. And that's why it's really hard to rank these movies sometimes, because you'll have the people who are just, movie critics who might not watch the show, watch the movie and go like, oh, well, this is what I think of the movie in a vacuum. Then you get nerds going, well, you have to watch this to understand it. You got to watch this to understand it. It's made for the fans. That might be true, but you're alienating a ton of people with that marketing strategy. And eventually your numbers will die down. And like you said earlier, that there are some declining returns ever since Endgame. Yes, you had No Way Home, but that one was a Spider-Man nostalgia fest. Everything else, as far as I know, has been diminishing returns.
yeah, completely. And it's like, it's weird because we, as the like kind of original MCU purists, are still kind of in that weird bubble phase of now understanding what everybody that had problems with the initial Infinity Saga are now having with our viewing of this weird multiversal phase. There's a couple things that I want to unpack there, just in terms of like the considerations of like where to place their little pieces in order to set up for the multiverse saga and the coming threat of Kang, and as far as setting him up as the next villain. I strangely do understand the decision to put that in Loki, because at the time that Loki aired, there still was not an MCU movie. Famously, this is something that like probably people would forget, but like that big famous, like the MCU is famous for owning that first weekend of May slot that pretty much all of their big tent poles have opened in. Like all you could track this, all their biggest tent poles. I think Multiverse of Madness is like the lowest grossing one that opened in that tent pole spot. But 2021 was the only year that they did not own that spot, because Black Widow famously did not open until July. And they made the bold choice to put the emphasis of the storytelling, because when WandaVision and Falcon Winter Soldier aired, it was still like the vaccine hadn't even rolled out yet. So people were very much still under lock and key at home. So when it came time for the summer, when things were just starting out, they made the very I think at the time, smart decision to have Loki be the first major thing that was setting up for it. And that was why they had the decision to place Kang there instead of having it be Quantumania. Because Quantumania was also originally supposed to be released a lot earlier, you know? And then obviously you have the slate for 2022 that happened, you know, like I said, which was sequel slate. And now that we're kind of finished with phase 4, which was kind of getting back all of these characters that we kind of hadn't seen or spent time with, you know, kind of sliding them into their new spots overall. What's it called? And kind of sliding them into their new spots overall. Now we're kind of getting into the now setup for what's to come, you know? And I think it's so weird because like, I, in a strange way, do understand the comparisons to the first couple of Marvel phases in the terms of phase 1, you really weren't getting anything interconnected. It was just kind of a series of like not interconnected movies. But the difference being that like at the time, nobody really understood the concept of a cinematic universe. So I guess that's kind of where the flaws of phase 4 are. And then how that goes into phase 5 being that now you have finally like the setup of like what the plan is going to be going forward. The problem for me is that it's done in such a sloppy, like, messy way as far as the writing for the actual movie goes. Like for me, like I actually, in a strange way, my problems for this movie do not come from the multiverse setup stuff. I think that stuff is all really cool, and the fact that we like actually get to explore the quantum realm as this alternative reality and like just another universe. I think that I personally have a theory that the MCU is at its best, or a part of its best, when it like goes into like the new world elements. Like every time you have an MCU movie that has like a crazy, weird, different feeling world, you know, not all of the ones in Guardians of the Galaxy, but like some of them, like, you know, like with some of the more foggy locations, I think that's when it's at its best. And I think that like the quantum realm stuff and like all this kooky stuff, like I think the comparisons to Star Wars are fairly accurate. And I think all that stuff is great. It's just the writing of the movie itself. This Jeff Loveness guy, I'm sorry, but if this is the guy that's writing Kang Dynasty, Jesus Christ, we're in trouble. Because this is just, like the script is really, really bad. Like really bad.
And that's another thing that people have been complaining about. Like, I heard the same thing. And I mean, I think it's a valid concern where it's like, oh my God, this guy who wrote, you know, Ant-Man Quantumania is going to be writing Kang Dynasty. We're in for so much trouble. But then people would go like, okay, well, and I don't know if this is actually true or not. I'm just quoting what the guy said on Twitter. Oh, but the guy who wrote Endgame or Infinity War, like one of those movies, also wrote Dark World or something like that.
Yeah,
where,
I mean, that is true. Mark McNeely wrote Dark World.
Right. So like I understand that, you know, just because you make one bad script doesn't mean that you are sentenced for eternity to write bad scripts. You know, you can also write good scripts, but it's also like an athlete can be really good one night and then, you know, be tired or be injured or just be in his own head or more playing a better team and then have a not so great night. You know, like I think people definitely hold people up to these impossible standards. Like you have to be perfect all the time. So I understand that. But, you know, you show your quote unquote lack of talent. Let's hope that, okay, now you're up to the big leagues and you're calling up someone from the minors who might not be ready for it. There's a reason for concern, but you don't know until you see the movie, but it is a valid concern. But see, that's the thing also. This thing turns into just like a huge Twitter thread where people are calling each other inbred hicks for thinking certain ways. And like, it's just unbelievable how so many people can. I love Marvel. I love to just completely be miserable online to share my passion for X, you know, like Marvel or Star Wars or whatever the case may be. But yeah, but I would agree with you though. It's a valid criticism.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to point out Luke's comment as well. Luke, they wrote Pain and Gain, baby. Yes, sir, they did. Michael Bay's best
Yeah, that's
movie, I
funny.
would argue. No, but yeah, I agree with that completely. So you want to move on and you want to actually unpack what this movie is about, because there is a lot that happens in this movie. Like it's kind of crazy. So if we basically break down, in a strange way, like I love the kind of the self-aware angle of it, where like Peyton Reed as like as the director, he has done all three of these Ant-Man movies now. His track record throughout like the MCU has been like kind of interesting, as far as like Ant-Man being a kind of underratedly great movie despite all of the behind the scenes issues that happened with Edgar Wright and everything, and Ant-Man and the Wasp Loki being an underrated like hilarious comedy. Like that movie is actually really funny in a way that most MCU movies aren't. And now he has this like giant gonzo friggin' sci-fi extravaganza that he essentially has to direct. And so you essentially he reflects that in the character of Scott Lang, where Scott Lang, who's the character who started his journey as a criminal right out of jail to a superhero overnight to a fugitive on the run to then being the guy that helped literally save the entire universe. Like, if that isn't one of the greatest arcs across any series of movies that I've ever seen, then I don't know what is. To now, he is an internationally renowned author, having written a book about his experiences of saving the world.
Right.
And naturally, in the 5 years since, obviously, his daughter Cassie has not only grown up to become a teenager, but also has been recast with the lovable Catherine Newton, who is just so great and memorable in the roles that she's done, like Reese Witherspoon's daughter on Big Little Lies and Detective Pikachu. One of the worst leading performances I've ever seen. And naturally, Scott now has to deal with the latest of the setups, non-setups for the Young Avengers, his daughter Cassie, who, in an attempt to continue to help people around the world in her role as a I don't even know how to describe that, a snacktivist, I'm gonna call that, because she's an activist in the wake of the snap of the MCU. I don't know. I've done better with some of my more made up terms here, but she is essentially designed with help from her step grandparents. I don't even know how you would call them that, because I don't even know if Scott and Hope are officially married. Hank and Janet, they have essentially created this one-way like Hubble telescope that will send a beam through the quantum realm. It's one of the flimsiest setups, I think, for a plot I've ever seen, where this thing that essentially opens up a portal, sucks them into all five of them into the quantum realm, and now which they discover has been somehow, or is rather, I don't even know if they describe it as the quantum realm or like this hidden universe underneath the quantum realm, but it's essentially where Janet was imprisoned for the 30, 40 years that she was stuck down there for, in which they discovered that the aptly titled and set up Kang the Conqueror has taken over there as his kingdom and is now attempting to fix his ship in order to bring his armies to Earth, only which the Ant-Man family can stop. So right off the bat, like, we got a couple of huge hoops to leap through here. We have the fact that the Ant family is now are now the ones that have to basically take down Kang. You have this massive underground, underneath the quantum realm dimension universe, that you witness in the movie with all of these different beings that have been sucked there recently. You have the setup of arguably, again, the next big bad of the film. Not to mention, what's it called? Not to mention that they are. I guess if you can glean like one sort of like plot element from there, you have these essentially what you have here is two dueling storylines, which is a Scott trying to bond with his daughter on the one half, and on the other half, you have the Janet Van Dyne storyline, which is essentially helping to further flesh out and set up for Kang, as the backstory that is established between the two of them is that when she was sucked into the quantum realm, Kang was exiled, as is revealed in once we get to the post-credit scenes, from the what's it called, also to the quantum realm, and the two of them essentially helped each other in order to work their way back. But once Janet discovered that Kang was evil, she stole the battery for his ship essentially, and then ran off with it, and then kind of like went around the quantum realm, helping to form all these different freedom fighter militias in order to help fight against Kang, at least until she was rescued in Ant-Man and the Wasp. So there's a lot to unpack there. This movie has a lot of plot. This movie has a lot of stuff going on. And so I guess my first thing is that, like, the ideas for the plot lines as far as what is driving this movie are not bad. Like, I can see a world in which these are enjoyable and in which you can divorce yourself enough from the MCU in order to just enjoy it. My thing is, like, very similar to Love and Thunder, a movie that received a lot of similar criticism. There is a good movie in here, There is a good movie in here, but there is just so much nonsense happening around it. Like, I don't know, like what is your take on that?
So my take on like the nonsense around the just like the plot that could have worked.
Yes.
Um yeah, I mean like the first half of, or I guess I'd say the first act of this movie, I was like, "Oh boy, we are in for some serious trouble." And I'm thinking, I was watching Multiverse of Madness, I was watching Thor: Love and Thunder, and I'm thinking this is just another superhero film. And I like superhero movies. I have my whole life, but when you watch them over and over and over again, when there's nothing new being brought to the table, when it feels very cookie cutter and when it feels very like, hey, we're Marvel, we can just create content and you'll enjoy it. It felt super forced, and it felt forced, and yet it wasn't trying at the same time. Like you said, oh, we have this portal that can go down to the quantum realm. Thanks for letting me know. Let's go down to the quantum realm. You know, like you definitely have like a relationship with, you know, Scott and his daughter trying to figuring out like, oh, well, now you saved the world, I can just sit on my ass and just, you know, be an author and kind of sit back. But, you know, Cassie's like, no, you have to help people. So it's kind of the whole with great power comes great responsibility theme again. But we also have kind of like the look out for the little guy, which I think is definitely more of a appropriate theme for this movie. But you know, like Hope Van Dyne going down to the quantum realm and learning more about Kang and doing this whole mystery. Like, what have you not told us? What have you not told us? What have you not told us? And I'm like, you know what? Like, let's just get this. Let's just get this going, because until she talks about the overall plan of Kang and her story with him and how he basically fits into all of this, I was completely off the table with this movie. Or that's not the right term. I was not on board. Definitely not on board.
Right.
Because I'm thinking, I don't know anything about Hope Van Dyne. We see one clip of her in the quantum realm with some guy. Why do I care? You know, you keep telling me I have to care. You keep telling me oh my God, I can't tell you. I can't tell you. This is bad news. I can't tell you. This is bad news. And I go, okay, how bad is it? How bad is it? You know, it's not a Jaws scenario where it's like, we don't see the shark. You don't see the shark. And you just keep telling everybody, oh, there's a bad thing out there. There's a bad thing out there. The first scene in Jaws, like we actually see, you know, someone disappear, right? The shark does something. We didn't see Kang do something.
Right.
So we're just told about it.
In fact, I believe that after we're introduced to him in the opening, whatever, like pre-Marvel logo prologue or whatever the opening scene is, we don't see him again for like until like 45 minutes to an hour into the movie of a 2-hour movie.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like you have another scenario where it's like we don't see the main bad guy until very, very far into the movie. Having the threat of him always there, you know, can work. You know, like we talked about, I'm thinking about in film school, like when we talked about like how villains might show up later on in the movie. And it's like we talk about like Silva from Skyfall. Sure, you don't see him until very late,
right?
But the threat of him was always there, and you could feel
his
it
presence throughout, like
yeah,
all of his devious villainous acts that he's pulling off, you know, and the idea that like the guys that Bond is going through the first like 40 minutes of that movie are all like just henchmen, like a video game. Like we're building up to him. Like there's a method that's used there that is not utilized here at all, or at least I think they try to utilize it, but they fail at it very, very harshly.
Yeah, and like, you know, if you use the Skyfall example, we see MI6 blow up. We see the deaths of so many different British agents, and you see, you know, M played by Judi Dench, like she's like, you know, really feeling it. You're like, I'm gonna get whoever's behind this. So it's like, okay, we see that something bad is happening. Okay, who's this guy? Who's this mystery villain? Imagine if it was like Bond, someone who we don't know killed a bunch of people who you knew. Oh no. It's like, okay, like that we don't see it, we don't feel it. And I think that was a big problem with the first act. A lot of the jokes didn't land.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't know who Hope Van Dyne is. Like,
right. Well, like, can anybody tell me what Hope Van Dyne's character is at this point? And I think the funniest part too is it's like I'm like, so I'm like, was this Marvel's revenge tactic against her anti-vax comments previously? I mean, because you had the problem with her, you had the problem with Letitia Wright, and Letitia Wright they kind of couldn't do anything with because like, okay, we kind of positioned her as the lead of this new franchise. We kind of screwed ourselves there. But with Evangeline Lilly, who I think they were trying to get rid of at one point as well, they were like, yeah. So like, I don't even know what her character is because like I said, she's not, the problem is she's not the main character of their subplot line. It's still Michael Douglas, who has now become the sidekick to Michelle Pfeiffer, which is crazy. Like, I don't know. Like, I have a big problem with how they do Michael Douglas dirty in this movie. It's like he starts off as like he's the guy who brings Scott Lang into this world as like this genius scientist that like was revered by like Howard Stark and Peggy Carter and like one of the co-founders of S.H.I.E.L.D. And now he's like this doddering old man who just makes bad jokes about ants. And I'm like, this is embarrassing, you know?
Yeah.
And like they're all like supporting Michelle Pfeiffer, who like I think probably does one of the things that I absolutely hate the most in movies in general writing, because this is where my problem comes in with how they portray the script in the first act. She's like, oh, I can't tell you. Oh, I couldn't tell you because like I was so concerned with escaping. And it's like,
it's lazy.
You knew about all of this for years, this potential like world-ending threat, and you never said. Now, here's the thing. Here is my one, if I can play devil's advocate here for a minute. My one point here is that once you got to the surface world, I understood why, you know, like once she was immediately back, you know, she was a little discombobulated. She'd spent 40 years in like this weird alternative plane, you know. Also, I love how the rule, like you have to have your helmets on when you go into the quantum realm. We just threw that rule right out the window. It's like, okay, you could just go around the quantum realm without your helmet on, you know, nothing wrong here. And so I love consistencies in big budget filmmaking. But so you have this deliberate plot device that is used in order to just stall for time, essentially, because that's what it is. It is the exact equivalent of Laura Dern's genius decision to not tell Poe Dameron what the plan was in The Last Jedi. I'm like, it is literally a very bad device that is beyond obvious that you are just stalling for time. And I don't know why they use it, but it's terrible every time.
Why? You know why? Because they're not telling the characters because they can't tell the audience.
Right.
That's why they're not,
because they've mapped this out like a friggin' algorithm where they're like, okay, we cannot introduce Kang again until this moment, but we need something to continue to build him up. And what's crazy is that I think they do a fine enough job, strangely enough, with Scott and Cassie's interaction with the little rebel figures, you know, with the new goopy figure that David Dasmalchian is voicing, and you know, and the William Jackson Harper character and the Katie O'Brien character, all those guys. You know, I strange that I think they set up like that little faction of rebel freedom fighters, I think was cool. And like the moment with like them getting to Bill Murray, like all that stuff I thought was fine. But it's like once she like finally tells Hank and Hope about Kang, it's like right at the moment when Scott is kept, I'm like, really? I'm like, you couldn't have said anything, like nothing was said beforehand about this. Like you like when they were delivering, like, Mom, who were you afraid of? You know, like there was, I don't know, there was a better way to do it, because the way that we got it, it wasn't well done at all. It became very obvious. It became very cloying. It became very boring. It became very tedious. It became very obvious that you were just attempting to stall for time. Like, it's weird. Like this movie simultaneously felt really long and ridiculously short at certain points. You know, I can't describe it. I don't know where that comes from.
So I was thinking about this too. So I was thinking, what happens if you just tell this movie chronologically, where you have the whole Kang Hope Van Dyne thing happen? That's
real quick. When you say Hope, are you talking about Janet?
Sorry, Janet.
Yeah. I just realized you were saying Hope there, and I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah. See, and that's a problem too. I can't even get the characters' names right. Right. Memorable characters there, movie. Yeah. Right. Sorry, I meant Janet. So if I said Hope, I was talking about Janet earlier.
Okay.
So
that's what I figured.
Anyways, Janet and Kang in the quantum realm. She's stuck down there. Give a little bit of backstory. It's like, who is this person? Because if you, again, like, I did not like Ant-Man and the Wasp from a couple of years ago. I haven't seen it since the theater, and I don't know anything about Janet's character. Nerds will tell me, oh, it's your fault, bro. You got to go back and watch it and understand. You got to read the comics. I hate that argument. I've never agreed with it. Anyways, it's this movie's job to set up everything that is necessary to understand the story in this movie. So it's like, well, what happens if you just started off with that instead of like doing like oh, this is what happened earlier? Just do that first, and then you set up the villain, you set up Janet, and then, okay, crap, we set up, we know his plan, and then Ant-Man has to get involved with it. And then, I'm thinking, okay, well then you wouldn't introduce like the Ant-Man character until like maybe 25-30 minutes into the movie. However, at least that way we have some buildup and we have a bit of pacing, and we have it where our villain's storyline is completely set up and understood, so we have a reason to keep watching. But then I'm thinking, okay, but then people will be like, this is boring, I just want to watch TikTok instead. Like, our attention spans are so short. Like that scene with Janet at the beginning meeting Kang is like maybe 3 minutes long, and then Marvel, and then boom, life is pretty weird, huh? I used to work at Baskin Robbins, yada yada yada. This is a funny movie, right? So I was thinking that maybe you just start off slower. You start off with the villain's storyline and Janet's, and then you move into Scott's, because we know what's coming. We have the threat, like, oh my god, this bad guy's here.
We've seen all the trailers. We know exactly as audience members what's coming. We have been repeatedly told Kang is coming. This is not anything new. And like, it's one of the most tonally jarring movies. You're right, because I think that strangely enough, if they keep it as a pure sci-fi movie, which is what this is, I think it works infinitely better. And like, I think if you're right, you edit it a little bit more, you make the earth tones a little bit more serious. You could give it, you don't need the stupid goofy, like, oh, life's funny that way. You keep it like pretty serious and monotone, that like, Scott's like, you could make it that like Scott's life has gotten like maybe a little bit more boring now that he's this author. He has to bail out his daughter all the time, who like is pushing him to do more stuff. Like, there's a way to characterize it without a lot of the typical MCU stuff. And from what I heard is that in the pre-reports that they had a version of that movie that did that, And of course, Marvel came in and did what they do, and we're like, nope, this part needs to be funnier. This part needs to be funnier. This part needs to be funnier.
Yeah,
all of
it's the cookie cutterness.
Terrible. I mean, the bad Marvel joke syndrome has been a thing for a while, but like, it was particularly grating in this instance for sure. And it really detracts from what could be some pretty honestly cool moments. Like I said, the kind that we haven't even, I know, I love how we've been talking this entire time. We're 36 minutes into this hour-long podcast, and we have not mentioned the word MODOK once. And like, the fact that we have MODOK, one of the, strangely enough, most iconic Marvel villains and just inventions of all time in this movie. And it's almost like they were deliberately trying to hide it because of how embarrassing it looked. Like, how do you screw that up? Like, they changed around, they did the typical Marvel thing where they messed around with the invention a little bit, but we get Corey Stoll back, this time literally as MODOK. I cannot believe that I just said that in a sentence, and it's boring, and he's making really terrible jokes, and the CG is awful. I mean, I know that like the entire visual effects department, like industry in Hollywood has rallied together in what's it called, in strike of Disney, but like, Jesus Christ, the effects were really, really terrible for him in particular. And it, like I said, it's just this gigantic science fiction gonzo affair. There's so much stuff happening, there's so much plot happening that like, I don't really invest in the character. It doesn't help that like one half of the characters in the storyline are just completely unlikable. Like Cassie Lang, I mean, I had previously had Catherine Newton on my list of like Hollywood poison people, where it's like, anytime you see this person in a movie, just like run the other way as far as possible. And the sad thing is that I thought that she was improving at the very least. As strange enough, I liked her last movie, her Blumhouse movie that she did, Freaky, and I thought that she was vastly improved in the second season of Big Little Lies, but this just like has her back down to rock bottom. First off, it's a recasting that frankly happened for no reason, if you ask me. Like, it wasn't like like an Ed Norton situation or like a Terrence Howard.
I know why it happened.
The latest one with William Hurt literally dying, so them recasting him with Harrison Ford. But wait, so will you say you know why it happened?
Yes. So here's the thing that a lot of people here. One second. Come on, buddy.
Your boy got to take care of the kitten.
He's just a baby.
Yes,
he's just a baby.
You should just podcast. You should just keep him on your lap while you podcast.
Yeah. Do you want to stay here the whole time? Yeah, maybe. He's looking around. He's like, oh, yeah. I want to see what's around.
These are the cat hours. So yeah. So why'd the recasting happen?
So here's the thing that a lot of people. I remember I talked about this, and people got so upset. And I go, this is the world we live in, folks. I was casting for like a student movie, and I learned firsthand what casting directors have to go through. Film is a visual medium. So you are going to be looking at these actors. So you have to cast someone who looks like a certain person. So it's like, okay, well, if you have to kind of cast somebody who is a little dumb, who looks dumb? You're not going to cast like, like a model or like a really good looking person, unless you are talking about like the really good looking dumb bimbo on, the Victoria's Secret model, or like dumb kind of like big jockey guy, right? But it's a look. And I brought it up with Fargo. So I don't know if you remember in Fargo when they're talking about those two women who are like, "Oh yeah, go Bears,"
Yeah.
you know. And I'm thinking, yeah, they cast overweight, ugly women because that fits the character. How dare you say that? You're fat phobic, whatever. Why did they get rid of in Top Gun Maverick? Why did they get Jennifer Connelly in there and not bring back what's her face? I forget the
Exactly.
actress's name. It's because like, some people would go like, "Oh, well, Penny was mentioned in the first one." Yeah, they got lucky with that one, because if the older actress who Tom Cruise had the love interest with, I'm blanking on her name, Kelly McGillis.
Yes.
If she looked like Jennifer Connelly, oh, you bet your ass she'd be in that movie. Oh my God, we brought her back. We brought back Val Kilmer and everything. Oh, but she's like old now, and she looks not very attractive. Let's not have her in the movie. Let's put Jennifer Connelly in there, and she's aged beautifully. Let's have her in the movie. Casting directors are shallow because movies cast good-looking people. So they put Catherine Newton in there because she's more attractive. She has more star power. She's thinner. She's
Well, the
more
star power
beautiful.
thing I definitely am on board with, but like the attractive part, I'm like, personally, I thought the actress who played her in Endgame was way hotter than Catherine Newton, but
Okay.
that's just me.
Right. But I would say that, she has star power, and like, okay, who was the actress that played her in the first, or
In
in Endgame?
Endgame, her name is Emma Furman, I believe.
Emma Furman.
Fuhrman.
Emma Furman. Okay. Gotcha. I would say
She even the crazy part is that the first actress even looks more like Paul Rudd, not Catherine Newton. Catherine Newton looks
Yeah, that's
nothing like
fair.
Paul Rudd.
I
They
would
cast Catherine
say,
Newton because she's a bigger name. That's why.
yeah, bigger name, and yeah, I think she looks a bit younger, right?
I
So,
guess. I mean, she's my age, which is the funniest part, but
yeah. So, I mean, like, I would say from a casting director standpoint, they go like, "Oh, well, we could probably just get, someone who has a bit more star power, who's a bit more of like a, I don't want to say sex symbol, but and see, this is the thing. I'm hearing myself talk, and I'm like, this is shallow thinking, but that's what happens in
yeah,
casting.
but that's how these things are cast. Yeah. Look, essentially what it comes down to is that like Catherine Newton is a bigger name, and so that's why they cast her, unfortunately. And like I said, personally, I think the bigger waste of casting is having Bill Murray in this movie at all. I remember when the first trailer came out, everybody was making a big deal about Bill Murray, and he's in this movie for one scene, and then he gets like eaten by a giant
Yeah,
space slug, and it's like,
yeah,
and half the lines that give him, it's like he's confused, but he's not confused. He's a doddering old man, but then I'm like, okay, we get this, we've seen this around before, but. Let's talk about Jonathan Majors. So Majors famously is kind of being touted as like Hollywood's next like big thing. 2023 is currently shaping up to be his year, as he is not only the villain in this movie, but we will also be talking about him again in 2 weeks for Creed 3. He is currently slated to be up for a potential Oscar nomination, as his movie that debuted at Sundance Magazine, Dreams, has been picked up by Searchlight and will more than likely be released at the end of the year with an Oscar campaign. So this guy has had quite the track record, coming out of COVID and establishing himself as like one of the big names. He obviously, with the release of the simultaneous Defy Bloods and Lovecraft Country back in 2020. So he comes in, and his performance here as Kang is markedly different from the performance that he gave at the end of Loki. Like I said, the interesting thing is that I think why so many people are just in general gravitating towards his performance as Kang is that Kang is proving to be a multi-layered and different kind of a villain than we've seen before. He's somebody who you never know which kind of a Kang you're going to get, because there's so many of him, so you literally have an infinite number of possibilities when it comes to that portrayal. And so he portrays him more in like the regal villain sense, and
yeah,
I mean, this sort of ties into the post-credit scenes as well once we actually get the Council of Kangs. But essentially what is revealed is that the movie, I think, hints at his dominance, and this also ties into a little bit of the problems without actually showing it, because essentially all that we get is that like he can shoot blue laser beams, he's got the costume for the comics, and he can beat the shit out of Scott in one-on-one combat.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I understand what they're doing, but like it doesn't fully capture like the essence of like just what he is capable of. Like, he is known as the master of time, you know? And like the fact that they've only really like hinted at like the possible through 2 different post-credit scenes, one of which in order to set up the Council of Kangs, the other of which will presumably a scene that is pulled right from season 2 of Loki, which from what I've heard is also going to deal heavily with this. So yeah, like I said, it's all interconnected. And this I feel like ties into like also another bigger problem once we talk about the state of kind of where the MCU is at right now. But I wanted to talk about him. Like, because Majors, like, I don't know, do you think that Majors blowing up like this in like all of these iconic roles is going to ruin his potential chances as like a future movie star? Do you think he's had enough time to prove himself?
Well, I don't know necessarily if you need time to prove yourself to be a movie star. Like, the thing is with casting, again, it's people will get cast before someone else even sees the other movie that they're cast in. So, like, the 2 best examples I have of that are Taylor Kitsch and Chris Pratt. So Hollywood directors go like, okay, well, you know what? Chris Pratt is now he's going to be in Guardians of the Galaxy, this big Marvel project, and he is, you know, getting buffed up for it. And, you know, we've looked at the numbers, we've looked at the focus groups, you know, he's like, women find him attractive, guys think he's cool. So, okay, he's going to be like the next big star. So he gets Guardians of the Galaxy. Universal's going, we need to get him in Jurassic World. Because, right, like it's not, if people think that Universal will see Guardians of the Galaxy come out in August and then cast Chris Pratt and then have the movie release like, you know, in June the next year, they're dreaming. Like these things are planned way prior. And of course he had the Lego movie too. So that guy, Chris Pratt, had a great agent. He goes, okay, you're going to be in this movie, this movie, this movie. And now he's this big star. Now he's a big bankable name. They tried to do the same thing with Taylor Kitsch, but John Carter flopped. Battleship flopped. Battleship flopped.
And now you don't see him anymore. I believe, if memory serves, he was also in Savages, the Oliver Stone movie as well that year with Aaron Taylor Johnson. Not a good year for Taylor Kitsch.
And it's like, oh, well, he's like that weird guy in X-Men Origins Wolverine. I think that guy has some promise, right? So let's try to get him the the main big guy. Jonathan Majors, kind of same thing. Oh, he's gonna be in Creed. Oh, he's gonna be the next big bad guy in Marvel. Okay, now he's gonna be like, and all these things are happening simultaneously. So it's the heat of the actor. It's the buzz on the street. Like, who's this Jonathan Majors guy? Okay, you get the agents and you get the casting directors and you get the producers talking. Okay, we're gonna get this guy in here.
Right.
It's not like he auditioned. Well, he might have auditioned for one thing, but it's like, okay, now there's this bigger actor.
He famously has the story that came out about his infamous meeting with Marvel and how it was taking so long that he was about to walk out, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah, it's funny because like it's one of those instances where I became vaguely aware of him like right before he blew up. Because in 2019, I saw him in 2 different movies. I saw him in this movie Captive State, and then he was also in the A24 movie that like was kind of a low-key sleeper hit over the summer. That summer, I remember The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which Professor Pat actually put on his top 10 favorite movies of that year. So he had like those little parts before he really blew up in 2020. And then obviously, you know, The Harder They Fall in 2021. And then now we're obviously, you know, we're shaping up for like, this is going to be the year of Jonathan Majors between this, Creed 3 and Magazine Dreams once that hits. So I'm interested to see. I also think the irony of once we talk about Creed is that we're going to be talking about the likelihood of 2 MCU villains, one of whom kind of positioned over the last one, who was kind of a one-off. And now you see kind of where Michael B. Jordan's career has gone, in which he's doing all of these kind of like Jack Ryan-esque action movies, but where he is Majors is kind of taking his spot. It's like, not only is he the new next MCU big bad, but he's kind of like taking like all the roles that I feel like Michael B. Jordan would have taken. So I think there's going to be some interesting synergy there. You know, just to start as far as movie star parts goes. And I guess kind of my reasoning for this is it's like, I look at a body of work like almost like in terms of like sports terms, you know, it's like a baseball's like, it's like a baseball Hall of Fame almost, you know, like who are like when you look at it, it's like, what are going to be the great roles that we look at for these guys? And the sad truth is that, well, the MCU has a lot of talent in it, a lot of talent. The sad part is that how many of these actors that we know solely for their roles in the MCU are going to have like a big body of work outside of it. I can think of like maybe 4 or 5, maybe, and most of them because they were already pre-existing stars before they joined the MCU. But like Chris Evans is not going to have a great body of work. Chris Hemsworth is not going to have a great body of work. Chris Pratt is not going to have a great body of work,
Right.
Cumberbatch maybe, but most of Cumberbatch's best stuff is on TV. Tom Holland literally came of age in the MCU. Unfortunately, Chadwick Boseman passed away before he had the chance to continue, and I think he was probably the one that would have come the closest,
Yeah.
How many of these stars are actually going to have like a future, The irony being that one of the few that actually does have a sizable and interesting career outside of the MCU is Paul Rudd, the star of this movie, because of his comedy career before this. But I guess kind of how this pivots into our last point that we're going to talk about before we get out of here, which is the current state of the MCU itself, which we kind of always talk about every time we have one of these come up. Like I said, it's changed and shifted a lot over the last couple of years since we've been covering it in kind of this post-COVID phase saga. But it's funny because I was talking about this with a couple different people, and I think the overall consensus that we came to is that the primary difference between the Infinity Saga and the Multiverse Saga is that the Infinity Saga never felt like essential viewing. It always felt casual. It was a couple movies a year that were fun to watch, and that at the end you would get a little Easter egg that would tie you into the next thing. But in a weird way, it didn't really become like Marvel until Civil War, and that's when obviously they started to get really confident and start to put stuff out. But it helped that the stuff that they were still putting out was good, and it felt like between Civil War and Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and Doctor Strange and Black Panther and how that all built up to Infinity War and Endgame, it felt like we were getting the payoffs to all of these years of waiting, in a way that when we've talked about a lot of other couple of final things, how they've disappointed because they try to throw in all of these new plot lines and storylines. And now that we're getting the post phase of it, this was essentially supposed to be the reboot / continuation. So in that sense, that's why I'm never as harsh on the MCU as I feel like other points were, because it's like we've seen like de facto reboots / continuations of this. Power Rangers did that for 30 straight years and nobody batted an eye or cared, I mean, look at essentially what Star Wars has done. Star Wars did the exact same thing. So it's the combination of the fact that it is still recent. It's still kind of happening inside this bubble, the fact that with the exception of 1 year, it's been going continuously straight for almost 15 years now. And it's the combination of that everything, like you said, every TV show, every movie, everything has something that's going to build into something, because now as opposed to one overall storyline that they're building to, they have essentially turned it into a TV show where every single movie is going to contribute to like one of potentially 3 or 4 different simultaneous plot lines that's happening at the same time that may or may not factor into a movie set that is still 2 years out. It's like they gambled on people's willingness to keep up with all of this content, and so far, unfortunately, it is proving to not be paying off, at least for my mind. They'll still have a few hits going on. There's still a couple of movies that I'm interested in. Obviously Guardians of the Galaxy 3, we'll be talking about that in a couple of months, and I assume that one's going to hit, unless James Gunn purposely torpedoed that movie. But I've always liked the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I, like many other people, have always thought that they stand out above the rest. But it's just sad because Ant-Man was always like kind of the little engine that could, and now it's kind of like the latest victim of the Marvel experiment, in a strange way, but like undeservedly so, if that makes any sense. I don't know. What's your take on that before we get out of here?
I think the problem with the MCU is pretty clear. Number one, you have this greater than life story, the Infinity Saga. It ends up with Endgame, where Endgame becomes the highest grossing film of all time. People were on board, even with people not necessarily watching every single Marvel movie. They had to have watched Endgame. And people seem to not understand that. Because if everyone did, then every movie would be as popular and as financially successful as Endgame. Right? More people saw that one. But it's perfectly titled. Endgame. The end. End of the story. We had our main character who started it all with Iron Man, and then he, of course, spoiler alert for Endgame, he dies, and then the world is saved. Great. The end. But now we're making more and more and more and more movies. It's like the story continues, where it's like, oh, what? We just climbed this mountain. We're at the top of this mountain. Great. We got to climb another one? Oh, Jesus. Okay. Now we got Shang-Chi. We got all these other movies, and so that's the one problem, is that we already finished the story. What's next? Maybe start a new book as opposed to continuing this other book. So it's like, well, is this actually the end? Well, maybe we should have just called it a different title, right? So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that now Marvel is like, okay, well, now we have you in our pockets. Now for you to understand the next chapter of this book, aka after the end, you have to watch every single movie and you got to watch every single TV show, which you got to pay for our subscription to get. People value their time, and sure, you're going to have the diehards no matter what. However, getting people to buy into that is going to be extremely tough. The way that you buy into that is to have every single piece of content be extremely great and of high quality. Problem number three, you can't tell me that the quality of these newer movies has been as consistent as the earlier ones. You might love all of these movies, but you can't tell me that everyone loves these movies. You can't tell me that everyone loves these shows, because every single film now is divisive. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania has a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes. Eternals has a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes. Their track record is no longer as high as it was. So now we're getting into a part where it's like post the end of a story. So we're in like epilogue phase, instead of just starting fresh and starting a new story, like the new Kang dynasty. This is the Infinity Saga. This is the Kang Saga, whatever the case may be.
The multiverse saga, as they've come to call it.
Right. So now you have post the end of a story, people now care less. You now have another story where you have to watch so much content, TV and film, and that will make people care less. And then you have the quality dip, or at least be more divisive. So that's going to dip even more. So do you see where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like people are like, oh, we're leading up to Endgame. And now it's like, where the hell do we go? And that's the same with me. I was totally on board with Endgame, and I'm a big Marvel fan. I'm a big superhero fan. I'm a big, movie guy. I love seeing those big blockbusters. I'm a big blockbuster guy. But now it's like, I am not excited for anything new Marvel. Like I was going over, like I just had it on another tab, like the Marvel, Marvel projects in phase.
In development, or
in
that we've gotten
development.
so far. Yeah.
In development. So
I think I can think of two that I'm looking forward to of the ones they've announced.
Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I'm sorry, but I'm not that excited for it. Secret Invasion, it's a TV series. Nope. The Marvels, not excited for it. Echo series, like Loki season 2, Ironheart. And I'm not trying to be like a cynic. I'm not trying to be a contrarian. I think that's a part of it too, is like people also want to, fight against like the norm. Like it's cool to hate Marvel nowadays.
Right.
And of course people talk about how it's the MCU.
Yeah.
I get that a lot. It's the MCU. It's woke now, and it gets political. Everything's political nowadays.
Part of those are, I will say, are not unfactual, but it's like that requires like a whole different discussion. And it's like it's like you got to pick those battles where they actually count. And the sad part is it's overused, like a lot of different things.
But the conversation does exist in that fandom, which turns people off even more, because trust me, like, you're on YouTube. I'm sure that you get comments about that where it's like, it's lost all meaning of the word, where people are just complaining nowadays, where it's like, we have the highest grossing film franchise ever. And so many people talk about how Endgame changed their lives. It was their Star Wars. Like
careful, you're starting to turn a little bit into the Joker there. You're getting a little bit into character there.
Okay, but it's like it's so important to them. They love Marvel so much, and yet, now we don't have any more Marvel. Like, what's next? It's like there's such a lack of gratitude, right?
Right.
Echo, Loki season 2, Ironheart, Agatha, Coven of Chaos, Daredevil, Born Again. It's like we're getting so much. Be grateful that you are getting it. Captain America: New World Order, Thunderbolts, Blade, Deadpool 3, Fantastic Four, Armor Wars, Shang-Chi 2, Spider-Man 4, Kang Dynasty, Secret Wars. It's like, just then apparently there's going to be like a Wakanda set television series.
Don't forget Nova.
An Okoye series, an untitled Scarlett Johansson production, Nova, Vision Quest. It's like, holy crap.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
That's a lot of stuff to also be in that realm of diminishing excitement.
Yeah.
And again, people will ask me, like, are you excited for it? I go, I'm not excited for it because of everything that I just said. But I'm also a realist and saying that these movies are coming. And all I can hope for is that I enjoy them.
Yeah.
That's
And I
the
think,
only thing that you can control.
yep, it's the only thing you can control. And I think it's the perfect point to end this podcast. Brandon, thank you so much for coming on and covering this with me. Like I said, it's like this movie itself. It's been an interesting journey, to say the least, figuring it out. Before we get out of here, just give me your final thoughts and star rating for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
I gave it a 3 out of 5 because I did enjoy the movie. The first act was awful. The second act got a bit more interesting. Main problem with the movie is that I still don't really understand the villain's plan.
Right. Well, what is Kang's plan? That is the one question that I have coming away from this. Like, I have no idea what his plan was, to get out and conquer everything. So conquer the multiverse. Haven't you already conquered the multiverse?
Yeah.
Isn't that what the point of the Council of Kangs is? Like,
yeah. And again, like Council of Kangs, timelines,
right.
I'm coming.
Like, are we getting the Watcher?
Why are you doing this?
It's so frustrating because it's like, you want to be comic booky. Be comic booky. Give us all of this stuff. Set this stuff up so that we at the very least have some knowledge. And it's like, no, they won't, and they never will. And so it's whatever. I gave it the exact same rating. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Like I said, it is enjoyable. There was a good movie in here. Will I ever watch this again? Probably not. And it's all of the Ant-Man movies, which, like I said, I have very much enjoyed my time with. I have famously said that, like, the first Ant-Man is, I think, one of the best MCU movies. This one, it's the one that I enjoyed my time with the least. So yeah, 3 out of 5. So Brendan, thanks again for coming on, man. It's been a pleasure having you on. Can't wait to have you back on, hopefully furthermore throughout the rest of the year. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
It's at BrandoCritic on any social media platform that you can think of. So at BrandoCritic on YouTube, Twitter, Letterboxd, TikTok, Instagram. Those are the ones that I use the most. Letterboxd is more about just, you can see what movies that I'm watching in my personal life. It's just for me to log my own movies. Twitter, I might post like a thought that I have about movies. I'm not on there, just like getting into the nitty gritty arguments, but you'll see like just my overall thoughts of the new movie. I'll give a little blurb on Twitter, so you'll know that a new movie review is coming out as well. And then on TikTok and YouTube, that's where, the video content will be happening, like the shorts and the main reviews for new movies, and occasionally old ones. Those ones are fun, just finding the time in such a busy schedule.
Absolutely, of course. And like I said, you guys go follow him with all the stuff that he's got going on there. And of course, be sure to follow the @official Talkin TV podcast across all platforms: YouTube, Spotify, which this episode will be up on audio form tomorrow, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of the T's, all of the social medias. Follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews. And of course, for myself and Brandon, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.